Thank you for joining me today for stories from Poplar Creek. I'd love to hear where you're listening from and your favorite way to listen. These stories are meant to keep you company wherever life finds you. In Chapter 8, Elinor and Ezra discover the courage to see how love can comfort old wounds. Please hit like or subscribe and let me know that these stories add a little something nice to your day. See you on the other side. It was a fine morning for possibility. Ada and Charles Ingram talked excitedly at breakfast, their conversation perfectly synced, as it had been from the womb. They had entered the world communicating to each other, and it never stopped. Jonas fundamentally understood the mood at the table. An idea was hatching. Charlotte rolled her eyes. Their home was always filled with new ideas, and with that came some spectacular failures and some surprise innovations. They were the only home in the country with heated water, a hot bath out back, and an indoor privy. In the glow of afternoon, the Ingram twins occupied the yard behind the smithy. The space always felt half wild, half constructed, as if the fence posts and iron implements barely held back the mountain lean. Today, the smell of oil and steel was outmatched by the crisp smoke of autumn leaves, and the two siblings stood together with their faces tilted toward the wooden eaves above the workshop. A flock of pigeons, a piebald rabble, had set up permanent residence in the rafters and along the slate lip of the roof. They clucked and whickered, puffing out chests in the gold-slanted light. The birds were notorious for thieving whatever wasn't nailed down, but the twins had always admired the cleverness in them. "They never forget," said Charles, gesturing with a sooty finger as a blue and gray bird broke from the edge, spiraling up into the air before settling back into the same exact rafter. "Every time, same spot. Doesn't matter how far you chase them." Ada stood a half step behind, arms folded, her own hair an untamable black and her eyes catching every movement. "You ever wonder if they dream about the places they go, or if it's just instinct?" she asked. Charles shrugged. "You can't teach a bird to be homesick. They just are." "The book says that they will travel many miles and then return to the same place," Ada reported. Charles reached into the feed sack at his feet and tossed a handful into the air. The burst descended with a sound like dry thunder, a sudden weight on the yard. Ada watched as two of the pigeons, larger, glossier, and a little shyer than the rest, hung back from the scrum. "You know, after what happened to Miss Catherine, seems to me that getting messages to town and back quick would be useful for lots of reasons," she mused. Charles nodded, chewing his lip. "If we could get them to fly messages up the mountain," he let the thought fall and finished. Ada's eyes went sharp with delight. "Why shouldn't we? No one's faster over the pass, and if we could work out a way for someone up there to send word down, it'd be almost like he lived here." A grin unfolded on Charles's face. At supper, Charles brought out 3 slates. The twins laid out their plans to their parents. The first slate illustrated the flight path, the second depicted dovecots, and the third was a list of needed supplies. "This is a fine idea," Jonas answered seriously, running his fingers through his beard. They ran to their books after supper to explore how to train pigeons. The following weeks were punctuated by the smaller hammers ringing in harmony with Jonas's hammer. At last, 2 dovecots were finished, and the twins concluded that Ezra Thornton was the most reliable person on the mountain to manage such an important endeavor. They constructed a note to Ezra, proposing the idea and how it would work. They had their mother review the note. "I believe Miss Elinor is heading up tomorrow. You might ask her if she will deliver your message. I have some dandelion wine in the pantry. You can take that along to her." Ada and Charles prepared a basket, put on their coats, and headed out to visit Miss Elinor. "Bye, Papa," they called as they passed the smithy, the strong form of their father shining in its depths. "Be safe, my darling children. Home before dark," he called out to them. Charlotte brought tea out to Jonas. Jonas smiled at his wife, taking her in his arms and kissing her. "You've given me fine children, dear Charlotte." She smiled. "My dear, I've been thinking." Jonas sat Charlotte on his lap. There's been a lot of that today. I think it may be time to turn the school over to a new teacher. What do you think?" asked Charlotte. Jonas was surprised. "We have 2 going off to study, and Lord knows there's always more than enough to do here. If that's what you think is best, Charlotte, then it's settled." Charlotte kissed Jonas. "Evelyn needs a little help at the mercantile a couple days a week. Between that and our brood, I'd say I'll keep plenty busy. I'll begin making inquiries." Charlotte consulted with the Goodwins and the school board members, and letters were dispatched. Mr. Whitlock's services would again be required. The following week, a letter was delivered to the Ingram home. At dinner, the twins excitedly took it in turns to read the letter to the family. "Salutations, Miss Ada and Mr. Charles. Your proposition is most intriguing, and I am happy to join such a venture. I have enclosed a few ideas for your consideration regarding the pigeon loft. I have many materials here, but will require hardware. Please advise. Also, we will need to hatch squabs at my homestead to run messages. I have explained your mission to other families here on the mountain, and they are much obliged to you for your consideration. Your friend, etc., E. Thornton." A week later, Elinor was dispatched up the mountain with the hardware, instructions, and a store of new candles for Ezra. She packed them all under her large quilt with her other goods and headed up. It was likely to be one of the last runs she'd make with her wagon before the weather set in, making it too treacherous. She made her final deliveries, her last stop at Ezra's homestead. He was delighted to learn more about the Ingram twins and was genuinely interested in their project. Afternoon was falling fast. Ezra had Elinor coffee and caked up before helping her back up into the wagon for the trip home. His hand lingered on her arm before he stepped back and waved. Elinor began the descent, taking the trail easy and careful. She had gone not a quarter mile when Sal lurched suddenly and stopped. Elinor got out to examine the cart, but found it sound. She felt along Sal's leg, but eventually found that she had thrown a shoe. "Oh, vexation," Elinor muttered. She straightened up and assessed the situation. She decided to leave the cart and walk Sal back up to Mary's. A light snowfall began, and as Elinor approached the poplar stand where the road to Ezra's hid, she decided she'd better seek shelter there. Ezra's little dog, Snap, announced Elinor's arrival. The snowflakes grew larger, settling in Elinor's dark hair. The green door opened and Ezra emerged. He saw the problem immediately. Get yourself warm, Elinor. I'll see to Sal. Ezra took Sal inside the barn, dried her off, and gave her fresh feed and water. He shook off the snow as he entered the cabin and headed to the kitchen to heat water for tea. Elinor sat by the fire. I'm awful sorry for the inconvenience, Ezra. I was trying for Mary's, but... Oh, you did right, Elinor. No use freezing, he said, handing her a cup of hot tea. They watched the snow fall in earnest, completely obscuring the road. Finally, dark fell, and Ezra and Elinor worked side by side, putting together a hearty soup and bread for their evening meal. The simple act of sharing the kitchen felt strangely intimate to Elinor, and her pulse raced. She ate quietly. Ezra put down his spoon. Please don't make yourself uneasy, Elinor, said Ezra. You're quite safe, and... Oh, it's not that, Ezra, she answered. Ezra didn't press for an explanation. As Ezra and Elinor had spent more time together over the past year, he had sensed in her a reservation about the growing intimacy. She had never shared much about her past life with her husband, but Ezra recognized her need to protect herself, which spoke volumes. I have a nice cot here. He pulled several thick quilts from the trunk and laid them out. He pulled a screen over next to the cot to afford her privacy. After supper and a few games of chess, they each retired to their respective beds, Elinor buried under the layers of quilts, and Ezra next to the fire. I'm glad, Elinor, that you sought shelter here, with me, whispered Ezra in the dark. Thank you, Ezra. You've been so very kind. Elinor drifted off to sleep, feeling his closeness. The night held the quiet under a deep blanket of snow, and the embers glowed faintly in the dark. From somewhere in the depths of sleep, a terrible cry went up from Ezra. Elinor bolted straight up, taking minutes to make sense of what was happening. Ezra turned and cried out in his sleep. Elinor recognized the terror in his dreams. She climbed out of bed, grabbing her shawl to cover her shift. She sat carefully next to Ezra's bed and started to hum gently. When his arms stopped flailing, she placed her hand on his heart and sang very softly. At last, Ezra opened his eyes. He curled up and put his head into her lap and sobbed. She stroked his hair in silence, feeling his body slowly come to itself. At last, Ezra took a deep breath and sat up. Elinor went to the kitchen to heat more water for a calming tea. Ezra was fully awake but restless and went to his desk, pulling out paper and drawing pencils. Elinor sat in front of the fire and handed him tea. She tried not to linger on the planes of his strong, bare chest. Her shawl slipped and her shoulder gleamed in the firelight. Elinor, may I sketch you? It calms me to sketch. Well, I suppose it's all right. You know, I've only ever seen myself all at once, one time, in Mrs. Pritchard's dress shop. I'm not sure I'd recognize myself if I did see myself. Ezra sat back and began to sketch with intensity and focus. The only sounds were the fire and the pencil dragging across paper. Elinor met his eyes. The glow of the fire and the still of the night created a cocoon. Elinor turned very slowly toward the fire and slipped her shift down around her hips, exposing her entire back to Ezra. Ezra's breath caught. He didn't say a word but continued to sketch. She wondered if Ezra could hear the thrumming of her body. When at last he had finished, he slipped down next to Elinor to show her. She covered herself and looked at the sketch. That's me? I look like that? Ezra nodded. You didn't change anything? No, I drew you as you are. Beautiful as the first time I saw you. A tear slid down Elinor's cheek. I'm pretty, she mused. Ezra reached down slowly and kissed her shoulder, and she sighed. Can I kiss you again? Ezra whispered. Elinor nodded slowly. Ezra kissed Elinor very gently. Then he kissed her shoulder, and then her shoulder blade. Elinor exhaled and closed her eyes. She lay on her stomach as he traced kisses down her spine and onto her lower back. He then lay down next to her, and they stared at each other as if seeing each other for the very first time. Elinor smiled, and Ezra brushed another tear from her cheek. He reached up and pulled quilts on top of them and drew her near. Warmth filled their cocoon. "I'm afraid to close my eyes," Ezra whispered. "I'm here. I'm here," Elinor whispered and kissed him. They fell asleep in the hush and peace of midnight and the comfort of bodies and souls that trusted each other. Color filled the sky, and Elinor woke to the sound of a hammer coming from the direction of the barn. She looked out the window and shivered. The snow had risen and almost touched the window sills. She wrapped her shawl and got the fire glowing in the stove. She was setting out breakfast when the green door shuddered open and Ezra entered with bright eyes. He took Elinor's face in his hands and kissed her gently and sweetly. They sat to breakfast, enjoying the morning's light. Elinor poured out a second round of coffee. "Elinor, I have to tell you that I love you, and I can't imagine being parted from you," Ezra said without preamble. Elinor set down the coffee and went to the fire. "I'm sorry I had to say it, even if you don't feel the same," Ezra said. Elinor's voice rose to a slight panic that grew as she spoke. "I do love you, I do. And what's worse, I respect you. And worst of all, I like you. Not a day goes by that I don't think of you or talk to you in my mind. Ezra would like to see the frost on the trees. I wonder what Ezra would think of this cheese." "Then what, Elinor? Is it so terrible?" "You don't know how it is for a woman," Elinor cried. "I have my work. People depend on me. To marry means that I can't walk out my front door without asking permission, and I lose say in the choices of my life, but I pay for every mistake. And if a man raises a hand, there's no law to say that he can't. Oh, Ezra, what can I do? How can I love you?" Her voice trailed, and she started to cry. In that moment, Ezra understood then the weight that she carried. He held her and didn't say a word, but let her tears run out. "What can we do, Ezra?" she asked again. "Elinor," he said quietly, "you have my heart, and I'll give you my body." She crumpled onto the bed, and he lay beside her. "These hands would only ever be to help you get where you need to go. To a mother or a babe, or to help as you saw fit. And my arms, these arms, would carry you up the mountain or down. And if things go bad, this chest is here for you to cry on." He paused. "I'm asking you to consider marrying me. I have money in the bank. If you ever needed to leave, it's enough to give you a new start. I'd put it in your name, a dowry for you alone. And there is a lawyer who can draw up a contract of marriage to set things right between us and keep you safe, legally. If something were to happen to me or you wanted to leave, I'd want you to be taken care of. Will you think on it? Will you think on it, Elinor?" Elinor folded herself into Ezra, tucking her chin onto his shoulder. "I'll think on it." The day passed in a sweet understanding, heart still delicate and raw. Elinor was still deep in thought and quiet, but they worked together. Despite the pain, a lightness crept in and settled into the empty spaces. That night, Elinor crawled in bed beside Ezra. She buried her head into his chest to take in the smell of him. They whispered about pigeons, vegetables, and fruit as the fire died down. Ezra found Elinor's lips in the dark, and heat grew despite the chill. "Elinor, can I touch you? Can I give you pleasure?" I've never," she began. But your husband, did he never? He took. He just took. I learned how to please myself. I've only ever pleased myself. Ezra took her hand and moved it down between her legs. He kissed her. Show me, he said softly. As Elinor's hips started to move, Ezra placed his hand over hers and kissed her deeply. His mouth moved to her neck and down as her sighs filled the quiet. He brought her to the edge and paused, letting the pleasure linger and build slowly. I need you, Ezra. Inside of me. She took Ezra into her arms and wrapped her legs around his. It was a tangle of hands, legs, mouths, and sweetness, as their bodies said what words could not. Elinor broke the soft night with her cries, and Ezra gave her all his strength. They settled again, pulses slowing. I like that very much, Elinor smiled. I had no idea. You said you remembered me from all those years ago at the mercantile. I thought you the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. I nearly knocked over an entire bag of sugar. You looked directly at me and said hello. No fear, just kindness. I love you, Ezra Thornton. I can't promise that I won't be afraid sometimes. Oh, Elinor, as you've witnessed for yourself, some hurts bury themselves deep. I can promise that I will never harm you, and I will always be here to comfort you until you find your strength again. And if you permit, I will speak an oath to Reverend Fisher as witness. You aren't without friends, Elinor. I've hid so much shame for so long. When I'm in your arms, I feel no shame. A week later, the very first letter delivered by Bird arrived at the Ingram homestead. Ada carefully removed it. Her excitement rattled the forge as she ran to tell the news. The twins put on their coats and presented themselves at the door of the parsonage. Fisher opened the door. We are here on official business, Reverend, Charles announced in his most grown-up voice. Ada just stood, barely containing her excitement. Well, thank you, Charles. Ada, shall I read it aloud? Ada shook her head. No, Reverend, it's a private matter. Fisher handed him each a coin and saw them off. He settled into his favorite chair and read the note. Greetings, my dear friend Reverend H. Fisher. I find myself in midlife, silver showing in my beard. What a long and storied journey it has been. Here I am with happy news to share. Elinor Hastings has consented to marry me. I have at last found myself all the way home. With appreciation and regards, E. Thornton.
Snow falling gently on the old front step. Boot prints faded as the daylight slips. Kettle on the counter, steam ghosts in the air. Your coat on the chair back like you're still right there. Strong door, soft heart, locked out the wind. Let the truth come in. Strong door, soft heart, outside the storm inside. You're warm again. Open, tiny burst of light. Your head on my shoulder, shadows folding tight. trees, but we're slow breath, quiet, wrapped in wool and history. Strong door, soft heart, locked out the wind. Let the truth come in. Strong door, soft heart, outside the storm inside. Let the sky